Hello, welcome to the webinar series, Lead, Engage, Thrive. Today's topic is alternative voting. My name is Thelma Blahy, and I'm a Rural Leadership Specialist with Manitoba Agriculture. What is Leadership Talk? Manitoba Agriculture Industry Leadership staff provide free webinars on building the organizational capacity within the agriculture sector, which results in high-performing organizations. A disclaimer: the content is designed for informational purposes only. This information is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Organizations should consult their professional advisors related to specific situations. Today, we're going to cover the topics in this webinar that are outlined here below. We're going to talk about jurisdictional guidelines and legal counsel, common voting methods, organizations' bylaws, technology and voting, advantages and disadvantages, silent bylaws, examples of bylaw wording, and resources and tools. Lastly, the resources and tools will help bring forth everything that we have talked about through the webinar. Jurisdiction guidelines and legal counsel. Jurisdictional guidelines, what that means is what is allowed in your area. It's strongly recommended that you check with your legal counsel when changing or drafting your bylaws as to whether or not electronic voting and different alternative voting methods are allowed in your area for your organization. The reason we're bringing this all up is because this webinar may be viewed in other countries besides Canada. The examples that are listed in this webinar are Canadian, but we felt it's very important for you to check with your legal counsel in whether you're in another country, another part of the world, what is allowed in your area. So once again, just a reminder, these are Canadian examples. A definition of voting. As written from the English Oxford Dictionary, 2017, a definition of voting includes a formal indication of a choice between two or more candidates or courses of action, expressed typically through a ballot or a show of hands. To add to this definition, using voice to express votes is also used. Sometimes we say "a" or "nay," which is a quite commonly used expression, or sometimes the terms "for" or "against," for the motion. Voting methods, as you can see listed here on this slide. The first one we're going to look at is the traditional methods. Traditional voting in person is the most common way that decisions are made at a board meeting. Following the guidelines of their constitution, members gathered around the table vote on issues pertaining to the board and the business that it carries out. Votes may be by secret ballot or a show of hands, or by a reply of "a" or "nay." Votes are counted and then the motion is recorded into the minutes of the meeting. Other methods of voting are used when it is not possible for everyone on the board to attend the meeting in person. Examples would be mail-in voting, voting by proxy, or absentee voting. We'll talk about all of these a little bit later in the presentation. Now, new methods are, things that are becoming a little bit more common. Email voting, conference call, online or electronic meetings are all on rise due to convenience and cost for organizations. I'm going to look at a little bit at some of the advantages of having electronic voting, electronic meetings. Some of the things that are advantages are you're allowing electronic participation in board meetings. It could help and attract and retain directors from all parts of your service area, reduce the risk of not achieving quorum at your meetings, and makes it easier to arrange and hold meetings quickly. Let's say a really important issue came up very quickly, it might be easier to gather your board members together. Of course, there are some disadvantages as well too. Some of the ones listed here are directors or members may not take the time to fully discuss an important issue before they go to vote. Not meeting face-to-face eliminates being able to read body language and nonverbal cues, which is an important part of communication. Or meetings may lose their formal focus when everything is accomplished by email. It's not the intention of organizations to have meetings where it becomes commonplace to have electronic meetings. Too much opportunity for discussion of important issues is lost. With emails not being signed or could be sent in error by someone, it makes it harder to formalize the process. Now, one of the Canadian examples that I'd like to bring to your attention is in doing some research. We have come up with Nipissing University in Ontario, and said while many organizations are working towards making changes in their bylaws to include electronic voting, not everyone posts their bylaws and these changes on the internet. So Nipissing University in Ontario wanted to let others know the route they took to their bylaw changes. So we've listed here their website where you can go and check and see what they have done. And now the next slide is quite a long one, but it's going to talk about their example of the policy that they use to establish their guidelines. And under here you can see we put purpose, scope, general, the policy, and review. So I'm going to go through and read what they have put under their guidelines. And this is you can find on their website, the link that I've included in here. Okay, so the purpose of this policy is to establish guidelines for the use of email polling and electronic voting with regard to the decision-making authority of the Board of Governors and its committees. Now, there's notes in here. The current board bylaws allowed board members to attend meetings in person or by electronic means, teleconference, but there was currently no provisions in the board bylaws for email polling or electronic voting at these meetings. So, on to the scope. This policy will outline the circumstances where email polling and electronic voting are permitted and will detail the guidelines for their use. So this note was the policy is not meant to condone or encourage the use of email polling. This procedure should be used only in time-limited situations or exceptional circumstances. It's not acceptable for it to become routine, usual, or common practice. The next example that we're going to go on to is Farm Management Canada, and they also I've included their website here to talk about where you can send general inquiries about their policy. They didn't have it all written on they don't have it on the internet, but they had shared it in conversation. But so recently the organization Farm Management Canada made some changes to their constitution. In order to save some costs, they moved from having an annual general meeting face-to-face. Now they have set up having their AGM set up as a webinar process. They've set up an electronic voting process so all board members have opportunity to vote on matters important to the board. So please contact the organization's office for an example of how they have set up their policy. We're going to talk a little bit about silent bylaws and what this means. If your bylaws are silent, it means the information you might want in there is not listed currently in your bylaws. The Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act provides for default rules in your organization if it's missing them. They provide model bylaws, which are examples of bylaws that organizations can use if they wish, as they are making changes to their own bylaws and need help with the wording. Now you can see that you have the option of overriding many of these rules by setting out your own rules in the bylaws, but the model bylaws do provide the default ones, and they also provide some alternate ones, or you can make up your own rules. And so I have provided later on the website for you to go, and here you can see it. It's the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporation site, and I just thought this was an excellent example of showing what model bylaws, like what examples you could use when you were talking about changing voting in your bylaws. So once again, they point out that all methods of voting have to be recognized in your bylaws, and that might not be currently the case for your organization. So one of the things that we're talking about for alternative voting, we're bringing up to the sides, is absentee voting. And under the Act, which I'll be quoting through here, subsection 17(1) of the Act provides that the bylaws may set out any prescribed methods of voting by members not in attendance at a meeting of members. The methods of voting prescribed by section 74 of the regulations are A, voting by proxy, B, voting by mailed-in ballot, and C, voting by means of telephone, electronic, or other communication facility in accordance with the regulations. If the bylaws prescribe any method of absentee voting, they are also required to set out procedures for how to collect, count, and report the results of any vote. So absentee voting by proxy. So here's an example that was put in by the Act. Pursuant to Act 17(1), Section 17(1) of the Act, a member entitled to vote at a meeting of members may vote by proxy by appointing in writing a proxy holder and by one or more alternate proxy holders who are not required to be members, and that's according to the bylaws in your organization, to attend and act at the meeting in the manner and to the extent authorized by the proxy and with the authority conferred to it, subject to the following requirements. A proxy is valid only at the meeting in respect of which it is given or at a continuation of that meeting after an adjournment. A member may revoke a proxy by depositing an instrument or act in writing executed or in Quebec signed by a member or by their agent or mandatory at the registered office of the corporation no later than the last business day preceding the day of the meeting. Now, or the day of the continuation of that meeting after adjournment of that meeting at which the proxy may be used. That's a really, really formal way of talking about how proxies, can be issued. Your organization might not be quite so formal. But once again, that's under the model bylaws. When you're looking, you might be able to find something to help with the wording that will work for you. Under absentee voting by mail ballot, so absentee voting at meetings, this is by mailed-in ballot. Pursuant to Section 17(1) of the Act, a member entitled to vote at a meeting of members may vote by mailed-in ballot if the corporation has a system that enables the vote to be gathered in a manner that permits their subsequent verification and permits the tallied votes to be presented to the corporation without it being possible for the corporation to identify how each member voted. And pursuant to Section 1971, a fundamental change of the Act, a special resolution of the members is required to make any amendment to the bylaws of the corporation to change its method by voting by members not in attendance at a meeting of members. Absentee voting by electronic ballot. Okay, pursuant to Section 17(1) of the Act, a member entitled to vote at a meeting of members may vote by means of telephonic, electronic, or other communication facility if the corporation has a system that enables the votes to be gathered in a manner that permits their subsequent verification and permits the tallied votes to be presented to the corporation without it being possible for the corporation to identify how each member voted. So pursuant to Section 197 of the Act, a special resolution of members is required to make any amendments to the bylaws of the corporation to change this method of voting by members not in attendance at a meeting of members. And of course, so the more formal, we've gone through some of the more formal ones. Here's some of the more current or common methods: or email, conference call, online, or electronic meetings. So while examples have been shared within the presentation of how some organizations handle electronic meetings, conference calls, email, and electronic meetings, with help from the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, some model bylaws have been showcased. So new and emerging areas with advances in technology. So very important that bylaws reflect the alternative voting methods allowed by the organization. Remember the option that it's possible to write a bylaw that doesn't allow any form of alternative voting in your organization. And however voting is conducted, there must be a way that all members receive good information so that they can make an informed decision when voting. Good minute taking needs to happen at all meetings, with the minutes available to all members once the meeting is over, and the minutes are distributed in a timely manner. So in summary, some of the main things to remember are: check with legal counsel in your area as to what is allowed for alternative and electronic voting in your organization. Review your bylaws and make a policy regarding electronic voting using support from model bylaw suggestions. And remember to review your policy every 2 to 3 years to help keep it current. That was mentioned earlier in some of the notes that I realized I had forgotten to mention, that when you make your policy, make sure that every 2 to 3 years that you review it to make sure that it's current and still reflecting the needs of your organization. On the resources website, on this slide here, I've listed 3 places where we've got some of the information that you'll find very handy. The first is a website for Industry Canada, the government website that we were talking about, the Canadian not-for-profit, like the Act, where the model bylaws. You'll find it by clicking on this website. The second website is the Farm Management Canada website, and I've included in the other slide their admin email address so that you can ask any questions, or you can check out their website here and see about their policies. And then the last one is the direct link to the university and talking about their board governance policies on email, polling, and electronic voting. To stay connected with our group, please send any questions that you might have to leadership@gov.mb.ca. Please visit our website at www.manitoba.ca/agriculture. Click on our Industry Leadership tab. Follow us on Twitter at MBGOVAG, and watch our recorded webinars on YouTube at our www.youtube.com/Manitoba Agriculture. Once you've done going through this webinar, you will get a follow-up email. On there, there will be an evaluation form and a list of our resources tied to this webinar. If you would like a copy of the presentation, because I know there was a lot of information that was presented, please request a copy by emailing us at leadership@gov.mb.ca. Thank you for joining us today, and I would like to encourage you to take in the rest of the webinars in our Spring 2017 webinar series, Lead, Engage, Thrive. Our other topics that were covered were minutes, agendas, today's topic of alternative voting, board orientation process, and quiet leadership. Please view our videos on YouTube at our youtube.com/Manitoba Agriculture. Thank you very much for joining us today.